Okie dokie. Boop. And here we go, everybody. We are live on Facebook and Instagram. Good morning, good morning. We are again here for another round of the Astro-Babble. Thank you for joining me on these social media platforms. Again, this is where we take 8 charts donated by you, the lovely followers, and we are going to read them cold. So I've plugged them into my SolarFire Astro software, and we're going to read them. For those of you who are watching via Facebook, you'll actually be able to see the charts. Unfortunately, Facebook's live streaming sucks, and so when we look at the audio quality will be better on Instagram than it will be Facebook. I'm trying to work on this, but it's just stuff. Yeah. So anyway, let's get to reading the charts, and yeah, let's do it, shall we? So our first chart is actually going to be a repeat, and this is always something that I encourage you to do if for some reason your chart does not seem like it fits you personally. We might have the time wrong. In this case, I misentered the year, so that's a big shift. So even I make mistakes from a software perspective, and thank you for catching that. So we're redoing this chart, and this is a lovely experience because this chart is so similar to mine. So I'm happy to correct stuff like that. So we're looking at Jay Craigs from Instagram, born at 1:20 p.m. in Renton. Let's take a peek at this chart. So again, we have Scorpio rising. So Scorpio rising is going to be the major personality marker for the chart. We also have a lovely Virgo sun conjoined the MC, the midheaven. And then the ruler of the chart is this Mars in Aries, which is stationed in the 6th. Whenever we have the ruler of the chart in the 6th house, it's always somebody who tends to be a little bit more of a workaholic, somebody who's very driven, almost overly so, especially with a stationed Mars. You know, the Mars is rather slow, and that's something that we look at with astrology as well, as the speed of the planets, because when a planet is going retrograde, like 5 planets are in retrograde right now, the idea of those planets not being at their optimum speed, and having a ruler of the chart, especially ruling a fixed sign like Scorpio, makes somebody a little bit more stubborn, a little bit less flexible than they would be naturally. And having Mars and Aries in the 6th ruling the chart, we also have a propensity for all 6th house topics, not just work, but also health and pets. Wouldn't surprise me if this person also worked in the medical field or had a lot of medical knowledge, as well as loved their furry friends. However, I joke with my friends because I have Mars in Aries, which is a very aggressive form of Mars. Having Mars in Aries in the 6th, I joke that I don't have pets because either they would kill me, I would kill them, or I would train them to kill other people. And that's a joke. I do not advocate animal violence at all. That's not okay. But the idea of Mars being that very hyper-aggressive, martial, energy in the 6th house of work, health, pets, we find a lot of a good chuckle from that department when we look at the chart. Having a moon in Aquarius in the 4th is a nice way to put the moon in the house of emotions. I enjoy that placement very much, but the moon in Aquarius does give us a little bit of that pushback emotionally as well. Aquarius is a little bit more of an apathetic sign. It's a little bit more of a distant sign, and to put that in the 4th house of family, there may be some emotional connection there, but always feeling like the black sheep, or inheriting some of those kind of quirky traits from family emotionally. Aquarius is known as that quirky kind of alien sign that really enjoys being different, but also tends to be a mystery to other people. Not like a Scorpio mystery, but more of an Albert Einstein, kind of like you're operating on a whole nother level mystery. So yeah, that's a thing. Virgo a Virgo sun in the 11th is a fascinating placement, as well as a really nice Mercury in Virgo here in the 11th. This placement really does give us a lot of solid credibility with crowds, with groups, with social structures, and manipulating those specifically would be a talent of this individual, because again, when we see the sun, the ego, being placed in the 11th house of social groups, and friendships, it does lend a certain amount of charisma, especially having Mercury, a planet known for communication, in his exaltation in Virgo, in that 11th house. It does bring a lot of really, really good synergy into the 11th house of friendship. So I'm a fan of that placement. North Node in the 5th house of creativity, we find that there's a striving towards the 5th house topics of children, of creative expression, of sexuality, and having Jupiter ruling that house as well from Gemini in the 8th. I would highly advocate this person to go into some sort of self-made product line. I think that would be an excellent expression of this chart, especially with the North Node in Pisces, that really creative, watery energy being ruled by Jupiter in the 8th house of business and other people's money. That's a really good sign that one of the chart development things that we would need to kind of work with, and especially with the Mercury in the 11th house of groups, like friends would naturally help to support any business or creative efforts that this person would choose to pursue. We do have Mercury in Cancer up in the 9th, and I think that from an astrological perspective, I like to see Venus in Cancer because it's this kind of octomom energy, and this might especially come to the surface in this person's chart when they're traveling, when they're studying abroad, when they're working with people who are foreign or out of their element. It's a very caretaking energy, and I think that pairs nicely with the Virgo-ness of the 11th house in here, because it does show that this person is very tender, very caring, almost overly so for people who have somewhat lost their way. And that again gives us this nice synergy between this Mars and Aries in the 6th. This kind of medical influence in the chart does bring forward this kind of nursing quality. But we also have that Pluto and Ascendant in Scorpio, so there is this idea of this chart specifically being a little bit more hypersensitive and withdrawn and slightly aggressive because of that Mars and Aries ruling the chart. But there is softness. There's a lot of softness with this Venus in Cancer up in the 9th. We just need to balance the creative expression and the tendency to be a little bit emotionally withdrawn with the social dynamics of this chart to bring it all together to create a more well-rounded individual, as opposed to pieces that might get suppressed or expressed depending on kind of what suits the flavor of the moment. We really want to spread the butter on the toast a little bit more evenly with this chart, and not, have a lot of strength in the Virgo pocket and only use the Virgo pocket, but then have this really intense Scorpio side and repress the Scorpio side, or only use the Scorpio side, then have this Mars in the 6th, which is, very leadership qualities, and not letting that out or letting that out too much. We want to balance the chart a little bit because we've got a lot of strength in a lot of different places, but how to use that evenly will be the question of the life. Excellent. So let's just pop back in, just making sure that everybody, yep, we've got a couple people jumping on Instagram. Thank you for that. Let's go ahead and we'll move to chart number 2. So chart number 2 is going to be Catherine from Instagram, born at 8:47 a.m. in Birmingham. Let's take a peek. I can see Catherine's already joined on Insta. Let's look at Catherine's chart. So we have a Taurus ascendant with Mars in Taurus in the 1st. Let's look at Venus, the ruler of the chart, is up in Aquarius in the 10th. A chart ruler in the 10th is somebody who tends to very much enjoy being in the spotlight. It's a very big draw up into the 10th house to put the ruler there. Somebody who who constantly find themselves surrounded by the ideals of fame, and it's not that kind of fame that you're just kind of dropped into, because of Mars and Taurus is that workhorse energy that really does want to work for what they feel they deserve. But putting the chart ruler in the 10th does give you that glitz, that glam, that constant need to be the center of attention, which I find a good complement to your chart. Although having the ruler of the chart and the ascendant in fixed signs, we are running into a little bit of the last chart's problems, where the stubbornness tends to take hold. Oh, but you've balanced that. You've balanced that really nicely with a sun in Pisces and a moon in Gemini. Moon in Gemini in the second house of finance makes you a little bit tricky with money, not necessarily in a bad way, but definitely somebody who tends to appreciate the good slip of the coin. And then we have Sun in Pisces in the 11th. This is where a little bit of your intuitive skills can get out of control, my dear. So when we have a Sun in Pisces in the 11th house of friendships, this is somebody who tends to be very psychically connected to friends. However, boundaries are a little bit of an issue in the friendship department for sure. That's something that we would need to kind of work on just a little bit, is making sure that we don't get lost in the relationships that we cultivate. Because you do have this tendency to kind of mind meld and Spock yourself with friends, especially with this Mercury in Pisces retrograde, a very detrimental Mercury in the 11th. Some of those communications, those boundary issues might need to be tonified, might need to be rectified, just so that your friends don't misinterpret what you're saying, but also you don't get too overly attached. Because especially with your need for attention, putting the ruler in the 10th, getting overly attached to friends or relying on them for things that they don't even know that they have can be one of the more toxic traits of a Sun Mercury retrograde in Pisces in the 11th. But that's easily overcome if you just understand that, people definitely want to spend time with you because of your flair, because of your stability, because of all these qualities that are very strong in your chart with a Venus-ruled chart and putting Venus in the 10th. Like, you're definitely able to recharge people, but you also have this emotional dependent need on friendships that might catch people off guard a little bit. We would need to work with that. Let's take the North Node in the 12th in Aries for 200, Alex. So we've got Mars and Taurus ruling this North Node in Aries in the 12th, paired with Jupiter in Aries in the 12th. You know what? I've seen this in a chart before, and this was in the chart of a very qualified therapist who was actually able to use somewhat antagonistic techniques to pull somebody out of their own shit. And I think that that's definitely what the chart is building towards. Like, don't get me wrong, hon, you have this really gooey, soft center with the sun in Pisces in the 11th. I respect your sensitivity immensely as a triple water sign. However, there is this over-aggressive side to you that I think can be used very therapeutically. Somebody who tends to embody the qualities of a leader, with Mars being so close to the ascendant, but also Mars ruling this Jupiter and this North Node in the 12th house of not just hidden enemies, but also, the 12th house is where we go to recover. The 12th house is the place where we find ourselves kind of locked away or confronting the shadow or on a mystical journey. And for you to have Jupiter, one of the most abundant planets in the chart here, in Aries, a very cardinal fire leadership sign, paired with the North Node, that kind of symbol of where we're headed in this life experience, you're uniquely qualified to guide people through the darkness. Like, you have this shining light quality to you that I think is absolutely glorious. And I would highly encourage that you monetize that in some way, shape, or form, because that Jupiter is also ruling your 8th house of business. I think you making that your business, and you really using that Pisces sun to tap into the ethers that are surrounding an individual, and really helping them to pull themselves out of their own situation, often through, again, that Jupiter in Aries, that kind of gruff, expansive, rather assertive type means of like, no, drop the act. Like, why are you holding yourself back? This is stupid. That Aries that doesn't necessarily soften punches, you're able to utilize that and leverage that to actually get people out of their funk, which I like. we just need to make sure with that Sun in Pisces that you don't get lost in the funk as well, which, charts mature, right? And so for you, it was probably a lot easier for you to do that when you were younger, but now that you've learned some of those lessons, it's less of a common occurrence for you to kind of succumb to that tidal wave of somebody else's emotions, especially as you start to realize that your goal is to actually be somewhat detached from that, and to help people shift perspective and lead by example in that department. So yeah, good stuff. I think that's just about it for your chart, my dear. I think we've caught all that. Facebook seems to be rather quiet this morning. Not really sure why that is. But let's go ahead and pull up chart number 3. Okay. So let's take a look at chart number 3. And we have a Scorpio stellium, ladies and gentlemen. Born at 7:09 a.m. in Mainz. Well, not Mainz. Technically, it's Frankfurt. But Frankfurt, for some reason, wasn't pulling up on my software this morning, which is stupid. But anyway, you work with what you got, and Mainz is very close to Frankfurt. So let's take a peek. So we have Venus, Mercury, Neptune, Ascendant, and Sun all in Scorpio in this chart. Absolutely ridiculous. So much Scorpio energy in the chart. And then we have Mars, the ruler of the chart, in Sagittarius at 0 degrees, just on the inside of the second house of finance. But still, ruler of the chart in the second house of finance does give us a very strong tendency towards money, especially Mars in Sagittarius being that fire planet and a fire sign. There's a lot of heat, there's a lot of mobility here. Let's see, where is Aries in the chart? Aries is also ruling the 6th, so there's a good kind of work for the money type energy in this chart, also in association with the health field. When we have the ruler of the chart ruling the 6th house as well, we often find somebody who's very much, again, that workaholic tendency, because the 6th house is work, but also associated with health and pets. So people who tend to devote a large portion of their life to healing others or working in a field that supports wellness, and or our furry little friends. So when we have a Mars in Sag in the 2nd, Mars and Sag being both fiery, not necessarily the energy that I like to have in a financial house, because it burns a little bit too hot, burns a little bit too quick. We really want earthy placements in the 2nd house. Whereas here, a Mars in Sagittarius in the 2nd is kind of like that scene in the Joker, not the Joker, I think it was the Dark Knight, the Batman movie, the remake, where Joker is literally standing in a warehouse with like a pyramid of cash, and he literally just kind of sets it on fire. Like, that's Mars and Sagittarius in the 2nd house. Somebody who tends to acquire money very quickly, but also burn through it very quickly, and that mutable fire energy of Sag tends to kind of take over in all the wrong places, for sure. And then we have the Scorpio side of the equation. So I think that from an astrological perspective, it might be a little bit confusing, because we have this fire energy of the chart, but a water-dominant 1st house. And then we also have this Aquarius ascendant moon, which does create a lot of distance emotionally. Our first chart did this as well, have the Scorpio ascendant with an Aquarius moon in the 4th. The difference here is that we have Jupiter here and the South Node here, which is a different flavor of Aquarius moon. So let's talk about the Scorpio stellium. So the Scorpio stellium has Venus. Venus doesn't like to be in Scorpio. She's naturally opposing her rulership in Taurus in the 7th. So there is this idea of over-identification with relationships, and relationships being a difficult part of this person's life. Mercury in Scorpio also conjoining Venus. Mercury in Scorpio does bring a certain level of darkness to the mind, does bring a certain level of, in a harsher perspective, I've seen Mercury in Scorpio go very wrong with paranoia, but from a helpful perspective, people with Mercury in Scorpio have excellent detective skills. They're extremely perceptive, very sharp, although their emotions do tend to cloud their mental judgment. Especially with Neptune here. Neptune in Scorpio does make people physically very prone to sensitivity, both physically and mentally and emotionally. Somebody who's extremely intuitive, but also tends to blur their boundaries, as Neptune tends to do, with other people. And Neptune in Scorpio is not something that I like to see from a physical standpoint either. Having a Scorpio stellium from a medical astrology perspective does bring a lot of stacking into the Scorpio body system, specifically the bladder, the reproductive area, the colon, and the sinuses. So we need to be aware that these are the body systems that this person will likely have the most stress, likely have the most tension, and will likely need to care for the most as well. So all of these things just to be aware of, in addition to the Scorpio level of hypersensitivity. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this Aquarius moon. Again, Aquarius is that sign that tends to be a little bit emotionally distant. So to have the moon in this space does hurt the moon just a little bit. It does make this person a little bit more withdrawn, especially with these Scorpio tendencies. So I think that if there was any advice I could give to this person, it would be to really remember that what you keep inside tends to fester. Yeah, and that's not healthy in the long run. It can be an effective strategy under times of stress, like, you can kind of camel it all in and just save it for later, but you can't forget about it, because when you forget about it, then the physical issues start to manifest, like when we think of Scorpio stuff, like constipation, like PCOS, like menstrual issues, reproductive issues, sinus problems. Those are all things with people who have Scorpio tendencies of repressed emotion. So that's something that we need to just be a little bit more cautious about energetically. Let's see, North Node in Leo making a square to the sun. That's intense, honey. You putting the sun in the first house in Scorpio and then making it square the North Node up here in the 10th house of success, you really should learn how to be just a little bit more public, a little bit more in the community, especially with Saturn in Capricorn ruling your moon from the 3rd. I think that over time, especially as you age, you're going to start to realize that the world is not out to get you. You're going to start to understand that there is a certain level of openness that you can give back to the world, and I would highly encourage you, especially from a teaching perspective, as Saturn matures once from like 28 to 30, and then again from 58 to 60, that those cycles are really embraced and that you start to use your more solar qualities. We might even an interesting experiment that I do with clients who have these stelliums is to progress the chart. So it's a technique in astrology that's timing based, where we actually fast forward time day by day to represent years of the life going by, and as somebody evolves through their chart, who they then become as people. And that can be a helpful technique that we might be able to work one-on-one with. But the big goal, I think, of your life is to shed this Scorpio stellium like the skin of a snake, and to really understand that embracing this 10th house, being a little bit more visible, being a little bit more open, being a little bit more emotionally vulnerable, is kind of where your chart is headed overall. Okay, let's take a peek. Good morning, Sandy. Thank you so much for joining. Some activity on Facebook. I'm not sure why Facebook is suppressing the algorithm at this point. But let's take a look at our 4th chart in the lineup. So 4th chart is going to be Juliana. Let's take a peek at Juliana's chart. So born at 6:43 a.m. in Mission Hills. We've got a lot of Leo in this chart. Goodness, we've got Mars in Leo, Sun in Leo, Ascendant Leo, Mercury retrograde in Leo. That's a lot. That's a lot. So whereas we had a very Scorpio dominant chart in the past example, now we have a Leo dominant chart in this example, especially with the ruler of the chart, because the Sun rules Leo in his home sign in the 1st house of self. Like, Juliana is an ultra Leo. This is a great example of somebody who has a bunch of fiery, qualities that we just cannot ignore, especially with Mars and Leo being present. Although Mars is combust the sun, so she is prone to overheating, using, that's the drawback to Leo for sure, is when somebody burns too brightly, they tend to burn out, right? That's not okay. And so that's part of this dynamic that I think Juliana needs to consider is like, yes, it's great to be super flamboyant and very much seen and to be very kind of hot and to be very carefree and to let your hair down and to throw your mane in the wind and, all that jazz. But at the end of the day, these placements are burning a little bit too bright. And we don't need to dull your fire by any means, my dear. We just need to learn how to focus it and channel it appropriately. And I think this is where your Capricorn moon comes in. So we have this excellent choice to balance this heat with a Capricorn moon in the 6th house of work, as well as a Neptune in Capricorn retrograde in the 6th. I find these placements very, very helpful to complement the Leo stuff. And the reason for that is because Capricorn is that cardinal earth. Like, it has that cardinal principle to it, which gives it that heat behind it. But a moon in Capricorn in the 6th in Juliana's chart really does help to temper the Leo, really does give a groundedness to the emotional state, really helps her to focus on daily tasks, really does remind her that, hey, it's not necessarily about strutting your stuff all the time. Actions can speak louder than words. And that's something that Leo is prone to on the harsher aspect, is that over vibrato that doesn't really have a lot to back it up, although Leos would argue that they always have something to back up their vibrato. Just because you assume that you're perfect, Leos, doesn't mean that you actually are. But this moon in Capricorn really does help Juliana put some of that effort behind her Leo tendencies, which I enjoy very much. We do have a Jupiter in Aquarius retrograde in the 7th, ruled by Saturn in Scorpio, Pluto in Scorpio, South Node in Scorpio. Okay, that takes the chart into a little bit of a dark place, because now we're delving into some of the very oppressive, very dark kind of family stuff, which I'm not necessarily a fan of, which then trickles into the relationship category. And then we also have some really intense shaking up of the 5th house of children and parenting. So there's this radical energy that Juliana has developed from a parenting style because of all of the suppression and hardship that she's experienced in the family and the relationship department. Having a 12-degree Jupiter opposing your ascendant at 13, there's this harshness that partners bring to the equation, which can sometimes be appreciated, but often takes a lot of work to appreciate. And there is a counterbalance there, again, with the moon in Capricorn, like the idea of Juliana learning how to slow down, learning how to pull her intensity and channel it into a forge, as opposed to just burning out of control. But there is the counterbalance to that argument, because she's already experienced all of this really deep, heavy water in the 4th house of family. Saturn in Scorpio, South Node in Scorpio is not nice in the 4th house of family. It just definitely pulls this black hole into the 4th house of family, which I'm not necessarily a fan of. And we would maybe even need to remediate with some Saturn work that I think would be extremely appropriate. Thankfully she's got this Venus in Gemini up in the 11th house, which does bring us a lot of jubilation, which does bring us friends who are a lot more understanding, who are a lot more playful. That Venus is in reception both by sextile, by degree, and by sign with Mercury and Leo in the 1st house. I think that's excellent. I think when in doubt, when life starts to get too heavy, friends are really the key, Juliana. Like, yes, it is important for you to have a partner, somebody who you can rely on, somebody who is there for you. But Juliana, when we look at this lovely Venus in Gemini making a sextile to Mercury and Leo in your 1st house by degree, I'm a huge fan of that, and I think that you should really surround yourself with people and groups and tribes that lift you up, as opposed to devoting your life to one person and thinking that they're going to be the end-all be-all. It's not necessarily as therapeutic in other charts. And you're also learning how to be popular. Like, you're learning how to rely on other people as opposed to relying on yourself, because a lot of the things that Leo has a problem with is asking for help, and relying on others. And they're an excellent talent scout, but when it comes to them being assisted by others, it's definitely difficult for them to bow because they are so proud as a sign. And I think that you've been forced to bow because of all of this family and relationship stuff that's really heavy in your chart. But you learning how to bow does not diminish your own light. And I think that that's one of the key lessons of your chart as we look at this Venus ruling the 10th with the North Node in Taurus present, is you becoming a team player is actually part of the dynamic here. We're trying to become less independent, and I know that it seems like you learning values of trust is a little bit more difficult given your situation, but that trust is really the key to unlocking some of the more favorable aspects of your chart. Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your messages. I appreciate it. We are just moving right along, making good time. We're halfway through the charts and halfway through the live stream. So just as a reminder, if you would like to be a part of the live stream, or you have friends who are really into astrology and they would like to be a part of the live stream, feel free to have them private message me their birth date, place, and exact birth time. I do need those 3 details in order to run an accurate chart for them, and I will add them to the live stream. The list is long, but I will message you when your chart is featured. If you're interested in astrology and would like to learn astrology or would like to book a private consult with me, you can always visit my website at scorpiorisingastrology.com, and I've got lots of resources there for you, as well as the YouTube channel. Just search scorpiorisingastrology.com. I have a weekly forecast. I have a daily forecast if you follow me on Instagram and Facebook, so that's my little plug. So with that being said, on to the rest of the charts, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody in between. So let's talk about Abram. So Abram was born at 12:48 a.m. in Sacramento. We have a Scorpio rising. Love it. Love it. And then where is Mars? Mars is in Virgo retrograde in the 11th. Ooh. Okay, so friendships are going to be a little bit difficult right at the beginning. So we have the ruler of the chart in the house of friendships, which normally would be a good thing, right? But the condition of the planet is what we take into account here. And Mars, the planet of action, is tempered in Virgo. It's not his least favorite sign, but it's not his favorite sign. It's moving towards Libra, which is technically the sign of his fall. You know, it's not ideal. He would much rather be in the previous sign of Leo, but he can make do in Virgo because Virgo is a working mutable Earth space and gives Mars just enough air to still combust. But Mars is retrograde, and this is what I mean in astrology when I say that charts mature over the years, yeah? At the beginning of Abram's life, it's going to be very socially awkward for him to make friends because this Mars is ruling the chart from the 11th and is going backwards, is going very slow in the skies. And so the light from that planet is compromised, and we find a little bit of hesitancy. We find that Abram is a little bit too picky, too sensitive with friends, and that's something that Scorpio, as a withdrawn sign, tends to be prone to anyway, yeah? But as that matures, it will become easier and easier for Abram to make friends, and in fact he will become a very sociable person, but will still be rather picky because that Virgo element is still there. We do have an Aquarius sun down in the 4th. Oh, family is just so important to him. Although one of the things that I really enjoy about having a sun in Aquarius in the 4th is the quirkiness of the family. This is it reminds me of the I'm gonna expose myself as a kid of the 90s real quick. And there was an episode of Dexter's Laboratory where Dexter moves in with a family who's a little bit more scientific minded, and he's just reveling in the weirdness of it, what we would deem as weirdness, but he thinks is like his thing. And so when he eventually gets fed up with that, he moves back in with his like crazy normal family who's not scientific, and he appreciates them. And I think that a sun in Aquarius in the 4th house of family is very much about appreciating the weirdness of the family dynamic, and I love that very much. And for some reason my video just cut out. Zoom decided that it wasn't a fan of my of my video. So we're just gonna keep clicking and talking. But let's talk a little bit about this Pisces moon and Pisces Venus down in the house of what's it called? The house of no, we'll just pull up the chart. Never mind. Okay. So Abram's chart, we have this Pisces moon, Pisces Venus down in the fifth house of the chart. In parenting, in family, this also really attaches Abram to the family dynamic, but then also from an emotional standpoint, really activates the heart center for sure. Really does create this nice gushy center. Really does create this beautiful sensitivity, somewhat overly sensitive because the ascendant is making a trine to the moon at 12 degrees. Venus is exalted here. You know, Abram would be excellent in the arts, would be excellent expressing creatively through things like dance, being absolutely fabulous in theater or drama. That would just be a place where Abram is able to really make things happen on a scale that I think he doesn't even appreciate, because that level of sensitivity really does let him tap into characters, tap into personas on a very deep level. Overall, there is this stubbornness because of this Mercury in Capricorn in the third house of writing, teaching, communication, which again kind of doubles down on this idea that I think at the beginning of the chart there is this tendency to not speak when spoken to. Capricorn is more reserved. Scorpio is also more reserved. Having the ruler of the chart retrograde in the 11th, more reserved. Sun in Aquarius even, quirky, reserved, fixed. But then all of this reservedness is really protecting Abram's gushy center, this moon in Pisces conjunct Venus in Pisces, this oversensitivity, this exalted Venus conjunct the moon in the fifth, just brings all of this creativity to the surface, which is just absolutely delicious. Unfortunately, you know, the tendency, especially when we're younger, and if we're exposed to people who don't understand that, is to guard that, is to make sure that that doesn't surface. And so we just need to make sure that we're encouraging him, but also selective permeable boundary. Yeah, the membrane of it needs to be emphasized and focused. But there's so much talent in the chart. It's just going to be exposed over time, especially with this Jupiter in Taurus in the 7th. Love this exalted Saturn in Libra in the 12th. There's just a lot of good stuff here as Abram starts to understand what it means to have people financially support him who are close to him, support his work, support his art, support his creative process. He's going to start to learn to let down his defenses and let his sensitivity speak for him, as opposed to the first kind of inclination of defending or protecting that overly sensitive space. Okay, so that is Abram's chart. And now my zoom. Let's take a quick peek. See if we can't get zoom back before we get into the what's it called? Host a meeting with video on. Give me back my visuals, Zoom. Okay, here we go. Yay! And we're back from outer space. I just walked in to find you here with that sad look upon your face. Okay, so we are here. We are still streaming. We are good. Connectivity issues have been solved already. Now we look at Tracy's chart. Tracy, my dear, my darling. Let's take a peek. 10:10 p.m. in Haverfordwest. Let's take a peek. So Gemini ascendant with Saturn in Gemini in the first. Bold choice, my dear. Bold. Bold choice. Anybody who has Saturn in the first, Saturn is that planet of restriction. Saturn is that planet of holding back, withdraw. It is a little bit remediated in Gemini. It does that air sign of Gemini does help to open Saturn up a little bit, very, very similar to the air energy of Saturn's rulership of Aquarius. However, still, having Saturn in the first house does give us a weakness from a medical astrology standpoint, because Saturn is in Gemini in the first house of the body. We also see that there is a connection between the lungs and this placement, and that there is a issue respiratory-wise due to some digestive stuff as well. So Saturn, as a restrictive principle in Gemini, the sign of the lungs, the nerves, the upper body, does tend to bring harshness or withering or weakness to those places, especially in early years. Like, this is something that I see in a lot of people who have childhood asthma, who tend to break bones in the upper body, who tend to have that Gemini upper torso compromised due to Saturn. And then having the ruler of the chart in Virgo, this Mercury in Virgo in the fourth, conjoined Mars and the Sun in Virgo, as well as this Moon in Scorpio in the sixth. So I'm leading you down a rabbit hole medically, and you're going to have to keep up with me for 2 seconds. But having the ruler of the chart in Virgo, the sign of the small intestines, also very significant. Also having Mars and Sun, both planets that convey heat into the small intestines, very significant. But then we also have the Moon in the sixth house of health and wellness in the sign of Scorpio, which is the sign of the large intestine. So to weave all of this around, there is a connection between the lungs in Chinese medicine and the large intestine. Both of them share the metal elements. They are the yin-yang organs of metal. And when I see Gemini and Scorpio on the first and the sixth, which naturally happens with that Gemini ascendant, but then I see the ruler of the chart in a digestive sign, and I see Saturn in the sign of the lungs, the idea of the gut and the respiratory tract being intimately connected, but also understanding that when one goes, the other goes. That energetic connection is something that I think Tracy should definitely research, because it is something that's a little bit more medically prevalent in her chart. The idea of food allergies triggering respiratory stuff, skin rashes, that sort of thing, is something that I think would be of value for Tracy to know and learn from. Putting the ruler of the chart in the fourth, as well as Mars and the Sun, the family dynamic is really interesting. It's also something that Tracy thrives in. Putting the ruler in the fourth does overly attach somebody to the home. Putting the ruler of the chart in a house really tells us where somebody is prone to find a lot of themselves, their safety, where they tend to circle, where they tend to constantly come back to. And Tracy is just a really big family person. That's where she derives a lot of her strength. But to have Mars here, to have the Sun here in Virgo, it really does give a little bit of heat, a little bit of agitation potentially, a little bit of finickiness that tends to evolve into frustration with Mars in the fourth. So even though family tends to get a little bit chaotic, a little bit overheated, a little bit angry, there is this sense that it's still a place that Tracy loves to be. But then she's also very content with work. A Moon in Scorpio in the sixth, it does speak to somebody who is, and also with a slight mutual reception, that Mars in Virgo ruling the sixth from the house of family and homes in the fourth. She'd be great at real estate. She'd also be really great at fixing up houses because of that Mercury in Virgo being very detail oriented. She'd be a great interior designer, great with feng shui. But the Moon in Scorpio really does lend that detective quality to the chart, especially in the work environment, because that Scorpio has an eye for detail, and so does that Mercury in Virgo ruling the chart. And her Gemini ascendant, very creative placements. So if she's able to use some of that creativity, some of that sleuthing ability, some of that ability to really dive deep into the chart without letting people know her motives, and her just kind of working very independently on her own stuff and doing her own thing, I think that there is a good a good opportunity for her to be very skilled, very crafted in her work, but it's because of that Scorpio moon, that kind of emotional withdrawal, but also that hypersensitivity in the 6th house of work, health, pets, that really does give her that edge. Yep, she's supposed to be a business person. That Saturn in Gemini ruling the North Node in Capricorn in the 8th of business. I think that one of the things that Tracy should really, really respect about her life is that she's really cultivating that entrepreneurship energy. Like, she's already learned how to do the daily tasks. She's already learned how to be somebody else's employee. She's already learned how to receive a paycheck. Yeah, but one thing that Tracy has not learned, that she's actually currently learning this go around, is really how to become independent, how to make her own financial resources, and financial resources through other people's generosity. That's something that is very present in the chart this time around. We do have Jupiter in Sagittarius as well as Neptune in Sagittarius in the 7th. On a higher expression, this is very lucky in relationships. But it is, Tracy's very attracted to the mayoral type of partner, somebody who's very friendly, overly so with other people, somebody where they walk into a room and everybody knows their name, somebody who's kind of out and about, always in the community, somebody who's very learned, well-traveled, cultured, but especially with Neptune in Sagittarius here, somebody who's an idealist. Now, all of that can turn rather toxic if it's not managed, and it can turn into addiction issues we see with Neptune. We can see diabetes with Neptune and Sagittarius, but also, it can be somebody who's a little bit too idealistic, and this is where the practicalness of her Virgo ruling Mercury in the chart is going to be to her benefit, is being able to sniff out the BS, but also have somebody in the life that reminds you, like, hey, don't take it so serious. That Saturn in the 1st house really does lend a lot of seriousness to the chart, and that's not always appropriate, to tell you the truth. So as long as we can balance these sides of Tracy, I think we'll be in good shape. Spencer, I am sharing my screen via Facebook Live, and then just using the Zoom meeting window, which is shared by my screen. That's how I'm doing it. Okay, so let's take a peek at Lynn, my darling. So happy that you submitted your chart. So let's take a peek. Oh, baby darling. I love it. I love it. I absolutely love it, Lynn. Okay, so a Libra ascendant just makes somebody sweet on the outside. It's really something that tends to convey a sense of beauty, a sense of outward sweetness, a sense of likability. Especially with having the ruler of Venus and Libra in the 1st. You walk into a room and everybody's just like, yeah, I like her. Yeah, she's nice. She's good. That general sweetness of the Venus and Libra does give us a nice touch to the chart, first thing. And having Mercury and Libra in the 1st house as well gives the mind a certain sharpness, and I really enjoy that. Also, we have the moon in Cancer, so a double rulership. So we have Venus in the 1st in her home sign of Libra, and then the moon in Cancer in the 10th house of success. With a moon in Cancer in the 10th, it is this emotional gratification with attention, and I think that having a Venus in the 1st ruling the ascendant does mean that attention is prone to come your way, and it is emotionally satisfying. We just need to make sure that we don't get too comfortable with the idea of attention leading to self-esteem. Yeah, because we see the sun in Virgo here in the 12th house of hidden enemies. That's one of the low self-esteem markers that I see in the chart, and to pair that with the moon in Cancer in the 10th, one of the harsher aspects, especially early on, as you didn't really learn, or as you weren't really able to manage your placements as well, could have been this idea that you constantly sought validation from the attention of others, because this sun was so compromised. Like, you tend to get so lost in the details. You tend to be very nitpicky about yourself. When I see a sun in Virgo in the 12th, this is often something that I see in a profile of people who have eating disorders like hyper body consciousness, somebody who tends to be very picky about their own personal traits, who tends to just pick themselves apart, and that can be really dangerous if not managed. So that's just something to be aware of. Now, Pluto is here, and Pluto will be the saving grace in the 12th. As you hit 50, and as you start to mature that Pluto, I think that there is going to be this idea of coming to terms with your personal power and your healing ability, of understanding that self-acceptance and self-love is really the ultimate key to your chart. You know, Venus in Libra, Venus, goddess of love, one of the things that she really tries to teach us more than anything else is that love is nice when it comes from other people, especially with your moon in Cancer, Lynn. Like, you've learned how to lean on that as a fuel source, as an energy source. But what Venus really tries to teach us is that idea of self-love being a little bit more important than the idea of receiving love from other people. So I think that that's what the Pluto will start to convey over time, is the idea of you not relying so heavily on the opinions of others and really making sure that your inner voice is tamed as well. You know, attention is a neutral force, but if you're giving yourself the wrong attention, or you're relying too much on the positive attention of others, then that becomes an imbalanced power dynamic. And Libra is all about balance, yeah? So even though you're technically a Virgo, I would say that you're also very Libran, because you have this ascendant Libra, this Venus in Libra in the first house of self. So I would read for Libra in your horoscope too. Let's see, what else? Mercury ruling the Mars in the 9th house. There's a very strong association with travel, the need and the want and the desire to see the world. The 9th house of spirituality as well, something, a topic that house represents, I think, is a beautiful way for us to expose your charts to people, places, and things that are a little bit more accepting, which is the crux of Virgo. Virgo tends to manage resources that are right in front of it. Yeah, and when we expose Virgo to all of the different kinds of resources, that they don't need to work with the same materials over and over, that they don't even need to see the same people over and over. You know, Virgo gets exceedingly frustrated when the people around them no longer appreciate what they have to say, and so constantly dipping oneself into a new environment, a new social group, sometimes halfway across the world, can be a beautiful expression of this Mars in Gemini being ruled by Mercury and Libra in the first. Very strict upbringing with this Saturn in Capricorn stationed in the 4th. The North Node of healing, learning how to work with others. I'm kind of running back in circles. Yep, I think that's the crux of the chart. Cool. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for donating your chart to science. I know, right, Spencer? I was so, like, okay, so me and you need to have a conversation, because we're just, like, we're in the same game, you and I appreciate you greatly. The idea of, I had been wondering how to share the freaking screen forever, and I finally cracked it with Mercury retrograde. I was playing with all these fancy softwares, and I was really trying to get the thing to work, and it was way complicated. And then somebody on YouTube just said, hey, if you share your screen via Facebook and then you go live on Zoom and it creates this pop-up window, you know, you can do it. I was like, hey, that's smart. Y'all are smart. Okay, hold on. Where's my 8th chart? There's my 8th chart. Nicola. Sorry, that was a Ricola joke. Anyway, so we have Nicola, who is our last chart of the morning. So Nicola, oh, Nicola, baby, I love it. See, this is this is what I enjoy about astrology, is some of you have decided to come in with very harsh placements. And some of you have decided that difficulty is going to be your teacher this time around. And some of you have decided to give yourself the benefit of the doubt. And Nicola has decided to give herself the benefit of the doubt. And she's done this through her ascendant in Taurus, but putting the moon in Taurus in the first house. The moon is exalted in Taurus. She loves to be in Taurus. And I really, really enjoy that placement. It does bring up a little bit of physical issues when it comes to the Venus-ruled body signs, because we also have Libra in the 6th, and we have Pluto in Libra in the 6th. So we need to have a quick conversation about the medical aspect of Venus and Libra and Taurus. So Taurus rules our ligaments. Taurus rules our neck, specifically our throat, and our thyroid, our metabolism. The way that I like to think about Taurus, especially a Taurus ascendant and the moon in Taurus, is anything relating to body frame. Yeah, so that's going to be the size, the shape, and the metabolism of your body. Having the moon in Taurus here does give you a little bit of a squishiness to your frame, does give you a little bit more of those Venusian curves, Nicola, and I would highly suggest that you embrace those, because I think that's when your body is at its healthiest. But with metabolism issues also being on the radar with Taurus, we need to make sure that your meals are even, that you're not fasting, because your body is specifically looking at meal regulation in terms of timing. Like, if the body can predict that it has breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the exact same time every single day, then it will be able to release some of that fat, and it won't necessarily need to be as strict or as bloated or as problematic, because it knows when the fuel source is coming. But also, one of the ways that I like to view the 1st, the 6th, and the 12th houses is this idea of the 1st is the house of the body. It's our natural inclinations. The 6th is when things start to go wrong. What are the first symptomologies that start to come to the surface? The 12th is then when things break down. What does that look like? Right? And for you, we've put this Pluto in Libra in the 6th house of health. And I think one of the things that you're going to notice symptom-wise is mid to lower back pain, right over the kidneys, and the kidneys not being able to keep up with what you're energetically and physically putting up with at the time. You know, kidneys are really interesting because they respond so deeply to our energy reserves, and especially we see this Venus ruling both signs. The idea of energy distribution is a big thing for Venus. Not just what you take in, but how you use what you take in, where you put it, where you put your fat, and how you use it for energy. And you putting Pluto in Libra in the 6th, I think that one of the red flags symptom-wise will need to be that back pain. That tends to not be back pain. It tends to be kidney issues. Hydration, as well as mineral balance, will be very important for your chart. Okay. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about the metaphysics as opposed to the physics. So when we look at the chart as well, the ruler of the chart is this Venus in Capricorn up in the 9th, as well as the MC. Absolutely lovely. You know, Nicola's dream is to travel. Nicola's dream is to spiritually evolve. Nicola's dream is to work with foreigners, people, and broaden her horizons and get into other cultures. Especially with Venus being in Capricorn, I really see that placement a lot in the 9th with people who are extremely good at academics. And I think that that's a great way to harness some of that Venusian energy, is to pursue a passion, for sure. And that Venus in Capricorn is making a trine to the North Node in Virgo in the 5th house of creativity. So I would highly suggest maybe studying art history would be great, because Venus in Capricorn loves things that are beautiful but old. Yeah, and then having that Venus in Capricorn making a trine to the North Node in Virgo in the 5th, the idea you would be an excellent appraiser, you would be an excellent auctioneer, you would be somebody who would just be great at identifying the truest value of things, especially things that are old or worn or have a history to them. I think that would be an excellent, excellent career field for you, for sure. And that goes back to the Pluto thing as well. Let's see, we do have the Sun in Sagittarius, Neptune in Sagittarius in the 8th, being ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter in, a square forming between that Sun and Sag, and the and the Jupiter Virgo. So on a harsher aspect, this is something that I would see with the early death of a parent. This is something that I would see because the 8th house is traditionally associated with passings, and the Sun is being ruled by Jupiter in the house of parents, and the Sun is making a square to that Jupiter. So friction with parental units, but especially family members passing at an early age. That's one of the things that I see with this formation. However, I think that the inheritance component can also be present, although money is traditionally a little bit more associated with spouses, because that Mercury in Scorpio is ruling the 2nd house of finance. But I think that we need to just respect that a lot of the mind, a lot of the creative energy, a lot of the parental dynamic is going to be surrounded by potential passings and working with that 8th house of inheritance, taxes, death, estates. And I think that would also, like, the idea of you understanding that all things of value are impermanent, but within that impermanence there is also value, right? And you being able to recognize that value and work with generational objects and estates and family and people who are in the middle of selling or passing on that legacy to the next generation, you would just be absolutely excellent with that. And my Instagram stream is about to shut down, but I'm still not done reading this chart, so watch the replay on YouTube or Facebook for the rest of this. But I think we pretty much, we need to talk about the Scorpio stuff in the 7th real quick. I would highly encourage you to understand, my dearest Nicola, with this mutual reception between Mars and Virgo and Mercury and Scorpio in the 7th and 5th, that sexual chemistry does not a partner make. Right? And as I say that, Mama Cardinal, who has made a nest outside of my window in my hibiscus bush, just decided to chirp. So that was a message directly for you. The idea of this Mercury and Mars being in reception, connecting the 7th house of relationships, the 5th house of, yes, children and parenting, but also sexuality and creativity. It's an important part of any relationship dynamic, but don't think that just because somebody is able to perform well intimately, that they can also perform well emotionally, because we also have this Uranus in Scorpio, which tends to bring unpredictability, and Mercury is that trickster archetype as well. So I would make sure that as you start to seek affection, as you start to seek the attention of other people, recognize that you seeing their value is not the same as them seeing your value, right? And take it for what it's worth. An experience is an experience, right? And life is all about the appraisal of our own experiences. But don't build your house on sand, right? Build it on a rock. And that's part of the interesting dynamic in the love life of your chart, is really understanding that, people are an unknown variable. They're not like an art piece that's going to appraise in value over the years. They have ups and downs. They have unpredictability. They have things that are outside of your control often, and we need to respect that. There are more stable forms of life that I think honor your process, instead of you just kind of flinging all of your attention into somebody who might not be as committed to the relationship as you are. So that's just something that I would advise you to understand. And I think that's pretty much it. That's the final word. Okay. There we go. Nicola, we were just talking about you. Okie dokie, so that is pretty much it for the live stream. Thank you everybody for joining me. I appreciate it. If you would like to be a part of the live stream, or you have friends and family who would like to be a part of the live stream, just private message me their birth date, place, and exact birth time. I will add them to the queue, and we will continue the live stream every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 10:30 a.m. If you'd like to schedule a private consult or learn astrology from me, you can always go to scorpiorisingastrology.com. But until next time, may the stars be ever in your favor. And there goes Miss Cardinal just chirping away. chirping away. Love you, baby.